Thank you everybody for signing up and joining the webinar, the first of the two-part webinar series on GBA Plus. The first today is going to be focused on integrating gender-based analysis plus into your organization. And just to let you know, ahead of the presentation, there is simultaneous interpretation available, and you can find, if you look for the globe icon on your Zoom screen, you can select French language interpretation if you would, if your preference is to watch or listen to the presentation in French. Okay, so just to start, I'm going to go through sort of basic overview of what gender-based analysis plus is, and then I'm going to move into talking briefly about the national collaborative project that ERASA is taking part in that's aiming to integrate gender-based analysis plus within the settlement sector nationwide. And then I'll segue into talking a bit more about equity, diversity, and inclusion policies, as well as anti-racism, anti-oppression policies within your organization. So just to start, what is gender-based analysis plus? Basically, it's about analyzing how people are impacted by the decisions we make. It's more specifically an analytical process for understanding who is impacted by the issue or opportunity being addressed by an initiative, identifying how the initiative could be tailored to meet diverse needs of the people most impacted, and anticipating and mitigating any barriers to accessing or benefiting from the initiative. And the plus in gender-based analysis plus, as some of you might already know, examines how sex and gender intersect with other identities such as race, ethnicity, religion, age, mental or physical disability. And the image here is the identities wheel that originally Status of Women of Canada, now WAGE, uses as a visual representation of intersectionality, which is the basis of gender-based analysis plus. So as part of the 1995 Federal Plan for Gender Equality, the Government of Canada committed to conducting GBA at that time without the plus on all future legislation, policies, and programs. In 2011, GBA was rebranded to GBA Plus. The plus was added to encourage consideration of the multiple factors that shape experiences and outcomes beyond just sex and gender. And at that time, the GBA Plus wheel, as shown on the right, was introduced. So I'm not going to show this today, but you'll find the link in the slides. Basically, it's a really quick rundown that WAGE offers on the differences between the biological structure of sex versus the social constructions of gender. For those that may want more clarification, those two terms often get conflated, but there are real differences. And as I mentioned, the basis of GBA Plus really is intersectionality. The term or the concept really was coined by the American civil rights advocate and legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw, and that was in the late 1980s. It's defined as the interconnected nature of social categorization such as race, class, and gender as they apply to a given individual or group, regarded as creating overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination or disadvantage. The link for this video, which in the interest of time today, I won't show, but it's under 20 minutes, and it's a really powerful explanation given by Crenshaw, both of how she came to develop the concept of intersectionality, as well as the title suggests, the urgency of using it today for understanding various social and political issues. In particular, in the video, she talks about violence against Black women in the United States, in particular, police violence against Black women in the United States. So if you're interested in learning directly from Kimberly Crenshaw, and I would highly recommend that you follow the link and you can learn more. But to put it simply, intersectionality is the acknowledgement that everyone has their own unique experiences of discrimination and oppression, and we must consider everything and anything that can marginalize people, such as gender, race, class, sexual orientation, physical ability, and other social identity factors. So we all make assumptions about people and groups based on our own experiences, and we can sometimes forget to consider how much of our own experience is unique to us and how much can be generalized to include others. So when these assumptions are incorrect and left unchallenged, those assumptions in our work can lead to unintended impacts on and even discrimination against people and groups. And this is a key component of GBA Plus, which is to recognize and challenge our own assumptions. So as I mentioned at the outset of the presentation, ERASA is currently participating in a national, Enhancing National Sector GBA Plus Capacity project. It's funded by Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada, and it's being done in partnership with 6 other settlement sector umbrella organizations nationwide. And together, the team has committed to collaborate on a project that's aimed at providing the newcomer services sector with skills, tools, and resources to adopt gender equality approaches using a collective impact framework. So this is just a list of the other partners in the project. As you can see, we've got people based pretty much across the country. And this is an organizational chart of how the team is structured. Our leadership is based at AMSA, as well as our logistics coordinator. Some of the umbrella organizations have both a project and a research lead. We at ERASA have a project lead, which is myself, and we work in collaboration with MANSO, the research lead at MANSO, Sally Ogo. And so the project aims to explore the development and implementation of GBA Plus resources internally within each of our umbrella organizations, and this is in phase 1. And then in phase 2, we're going to be working with IRCC-funded service provider organizations within each of the provinces and regions represented. So before starting work on phase 1 of the project, each umbrella, including here at ERASA, did an in-depth internal gender-based analysis plus readiness assessment of their organizations and our organization. So here at ERASA, this included doing an in-depth review of our policies, including our HR policy and procedures and strategic plan, our programs, practices, and communications. An employee survey was also administered to obtain a baseline reading of GBA Plus readiness and capacity. It included 22 questions that were multiple choice, open-ended, and 1 Likert question to gauge employees' knowledge of and familiarity with a list of GBA Plus related terms and concepts. Also, an interview was conducted with our executive director, Carolyn Whiteway, and interviews with other staff and board members may still be to come. And so just to quickly review the findings from that internal assessment, we found that there is really a strong commitment to this work by our organization's leadership and staff. We have previous experience that we can build on in providing GBA Plus and equity, diversity, and inclusion related training for members and staff. And while no formal EDI policy was in place at ERASA, EDI related elements were included in the HR policy and procedures and throughout the organization's operations. And we also benefited from really great timing because we're currently working on our next strategic plan. We're revising our HR policy and procedures, and we're formally establishing strategic values for the organization. So these all represent valuable opportunities to integrate GBA Plus into the organization. And then one final point, while staff were generally enthusiastic about integrating GBA Plus into our operations, they did identify needing more training and guidance to feel prepared and equipped to do so. moving to the first, I'm going to do a couple breakout rooms during today's session so we can have some really good dialogue amongst participants, and hopefully can share best practices, experiences, or questions. So for the first breakout room, the questions are, in what ways are you already bringing a GBA plus or intersectional lens into the work that you do at your organization? Also, are there ways that these considerations could be expanded or enhanced? And what best practices can you recommend for incorporating intersectionality into settlement sector service and program delivery? Does anybody want to share any of the insights that they gained from talking with your colleagues in the sector within your breakout room, whether it's best practices, things that you're already doing that you see as fitting in to this, to the work of GBA Plus? I'm just going to leave this up here. So I may not see if anybody on the ERASA team sees any hands. If you could let me know, I can't see everybody all at once. And also feel free to come off of mute and just add to the discussion as you would like to.
Hi, Stephanie. It's Jamie and Leo from the Association for New Canadians here in St. John's. And
Hi.
what we were talking about is, the goal that we saw GBA Plus is designed not to unintentionally disadvantage a particular group for under a number of areas or barriers, if you will. And one of the examples, we've been doing this, for a very long time, looking at our activities and our programs and our services to ensure that individuals aren't unintentionally disadvantaged. So, the example that I gave is that, when we, as part of our LINK program, which Leo is the director, we'll often have field trips as a means of promoting integration. And if they decide to go, say, on a hike, then someone who has mobility issues may not be able to participate in that. So then we have to rethink that type of programming. Or if they're going to visit, say, a museum, and there's a fee associated with it, whether or not individuals who have financial challenges would be able to participate because it would cause potentially financial hardship for them. So then turning around and taking those examples and then looking at alternate ways of achieving the same outcome, but with different activities that don't unintentionally disadvantage a particular group.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jamie, for that contribution. I think you're absolutely kind of bang on in terms of like what the goals and aims are of GBA Plus and intersectionality. And, just to acknowledge, as we were discussing in the breakout room that I was in, while the terminology of GBA Plus may not be the most familiar within the settlement sector, the work of doing intersectional analysis, looking at EDI considerations, all of these things are not new. So just to have that acknowledgement that there's a lot of important and really great work already happening in the sector. And so looking at this in terms of GBA Plus, just kind of as an opportunity to say, recognize what's already being done within your organizations and looking to maybe how it can be enhanced. But yeah, just thank you, Jamie, for making that point. That's really great. Does anyone else want to add anything that came out of their breakout room discussion? I see a hand up.
It's Lisa.
Lisa? Yeah.
It's Lisa. Yeah. Morning,
Sorry.
everyone. That's okay. Interesting in our group is that I think we all realize we're sort of at the beginning of our journey here. And what probably sparked attending this webinar for some of us is the fact that with our new submissions to IRCC for the next funding cycle, that this is going to become an integral part, and we really need to, I guess, get up on our education so that we can, provide that information. The other thing is that we've also identified that many of our organizations, we're doing sort of individual things right now, but we don't really have a strategy across our programs and across our organizations to make sure that we're really consistent with this. So we're probably, in terms of increasing our education, but also trying to look at how can we best present or develop a strategy so that this is not just a one-off, it's not tokenism, it's not just when we have an event, but it's embedded actually into our values and the strategy of our organizations.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. That's amazing. And 100% to everything that you said about, making it a really substantive commitment on the part of organizations, and not just being solely focused on kind of meeting that requirement around funding, although that is certainly an important part, as everyone's aware from the recent CFP release. But yeah, and so and to speak to the point about the individual commitments and the individual actions within organizations and the lack of a common strategy. So that's something we're working on with this national collaborative team to try to bring like tools, resources and guidance that will be applicable and useful across the country within the settlement sector. So to try to provide some of that centralized guidance. We're kind of in the first phase of that project, but that's what we're working towards. So stay tuned for the outcomes of that. The project is still, as I said, underway and will be until late 2024. So we're hoping to produce some things that will help with that. That's kind of central strategy. I saw a hand, Olive, I believe.
Yes. Hi. Hello, everyone. So one of the things we talked about in our breakout room is the fact that some of the principles or tools of GBA Plus are things that we already applying in our work, knowingly or unknowingly, because again, we work in this sector. However, I think for so many people on this call today, I think a little bit of introduction to the principles of GBA Plus and what it is. I think that's what a lot of people are looking forward to hearing from this workshop today, because in as much as we're already doing that, we may not necessarily know exactly what those are, what those skills or competencies that we're already applying. But this may be part of your lineup in your workshop, but I think a lot of people are expecting to start with some bit of introduction on what those core tools and principles of GBA Plus are. So I just wanted to put that forward too, as we said in our group.
Yes, thank you so much, Olive, for mentioning that to the larger group. So the overview of GBA Plus today is pretty broad. I'll go into more detail in the second part of the webinar series, but I have also provided links at the end for the slides that will be sent out as well for additional resources. So Status of Women of Canada, originally Now Wage, has a lot of great kind of simple, easy to access guidance around applying GBA Plus. But what we're working for in this national project, and things are still being developed, is trying to tailor that specifically to the settlement sector, because their guidance is useful. It isn't necessarily fully taking into account the context that we're working within. Yes. Does anybody else have any questions or comments before we move on? Okay, I'll just do a quick, make sure I'm not missing anybody. Okay, what I would do for the second part of the presentation is to move from strictly looking at gender-based analysis plus as kind of siloed or something different, kind of start making the connections between gender-based analysis plus and EDI, as well as anti-racism and anti-oppression approaches, which may be more familiar within the context of the work that you have been doing. Just a second here. So gender-based analysis plus, as I started discussing at the beginning, involves an analysis of the context within within which people live, including structural or systemic conditions that might create barriers for some, as well as opportunities for others. And Jamie, with your comment earlier, you really highlighted this well. So it's a tool by which we can learn and understand how to address systemic oppression. And equity, diversity, and inclusion. So equity is looking at fairness, the removal of systemic barriers and biases. Diversity, looking at differences in lived experience, background, identity, culture, and more. And inclusion, actively fostering an environment in which everyone can fully participate. And the national manager for our GBA, Enhancing GBA Plus project, put it really well when she described the EDI as the why and GBA Plus as the how we go about addressing systemic oppression. So equity, diversity, and inclusion is a conceptual framework that promotes the fair treatment and full participation of all people, especially populations that have historically been underrepresented or subject to discrimination because of their background, identity, disability, and etc. And another framework or approach that may be more familiar within the sector is anti-racism and anti-oppression, or ARAO. Anti-oppression works to recognize the oppression that exists in our society and attempts to mitigate its effects and eventually equalize the power imbalance in our communities. It challenges the systemic biases that devalue and marginalize difference. So it's really looking at the structural systemic barriers and how we can challenge and overcome those. And anti-racism is the active, and this is really important, the kind of active part of this process of identifying and eliminating racism by changing systems, organizational structures, policies, and practices and attitudes so that power is redistributed and shared equitably. So with ARAO, you see more of a focus, a central focus on systems and structural change. Whereas with EDI, it's more about creating change within existing structures and systems. So there is a difference there. And so there have been some critiques leveled at the EDI approach, at least when taken on its own. So this is a quote from Delia Douglas, and it's rather than moving towards more robust, transparent, and responsive strategies and practices. And most institutions, EDI has largely masked and supported white supremacy. This is due in large part to the fact that EDI was not designed to address racism, systemic or otherwise. And building on James Baldwin's insights, if racism is not named, then it cannot be faced or addressed. So again, you can see how the two are similar in some ways, but quite different in others. And critics of EDI have also pointed out how it is a mistake to view inclusion as a process wherein those on the margins are able to simply fit into the criteria, systems, organizations that are defined by the center. The goal is not to have those in power remain at the center and welcome those who have previously been excluded. The goal is to identify the norms, values, hostilities, barriers, etc., so that they can be disrupted and dismantled. And so on the left, you can see the various types of racism that exist, starting at the bottom with the systemic, moving up to the institutional, on to social, cultural, and then down to the individual level.
Stephanie,
Excuse me.
I'm sorry.
sorry.
I think we're not seeing your screen, so I don't know if you were sharing slides.
Oh,
or...
yes. Sorry.
Thank you.
I didn't realize it didn't come back on. Sorry about that. So we'll just go back through here. Okay, so as I said, this is just representing how EDI fits with GBA Plus.
You're still not able to see your slides, Stephanie?
You probably need to reshare your screen.
Yeah.
Okay, just one moment. Sorry about that. Okay, here we go. This should work. I apologize for that. Okay, here we go. Okay. Is everybody able to see them again now?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect. I think it got disrupted when I came back from the breakout room. I apologize about that. Sorry, everyone. I'll just go back here. So the ones that we did after the breakout room. So this is looking at how EDI fits with GBA Plus. as I was talking, EDI and ARAO as they are similar and different. And then, so this is the diagram that I mentioned on the left, looking at the sort of different forms of racism that exist, and gives a kind of visual of starting to think about how we are challenging racism, how we identify and how we challenge racism in each of these spheres. And so in presenting this, I realize some that are attending today may already have organizational EDI or RAO policies, and some may not. So I thought it would be useful to provide a little bit of guidance for those that may not have a formal policy developed at this point, and maybe some points to consider for those that already have a policy and how it could be enhanced or expanded. So this guidance is based both on my own experience of working on the development of a races EDI policy, as well as general guidance found online through searching kind of best practices for EDI, ARAO policy development. And so the first point is, before developing an EDI policy, organizations might find it useful to start by completing an EDI diagnosis. And so I think very much what we did at ERASA with the internal readiness assessment, looking at the our organization's foundational policies, programs, and practices, with an eye to seeing how, in our case specifically, GBA Plus and intersectionality, as well as EDI more generally, were already integrated into the work that we do, and maybe some of the gaps where these could be, or gaps that may need to be addressed or improved. And so you could get a baseline understanding of where your organization is starting from. Oh, we have a hand, sorry. Yes. Kiingi? Hi, Kiingi? Okay, so if there aren't any comments or questions right now, I'm just going to move forward. Again, so before beginning, it's useful to get a sense of where your organization is at already with the EDI, or again, whatever related approach or framework that you're using in your organization to structure your work. And kind of take stock of what's being done and what can be done to improve and enhance. This allows organizations to pinpoint EDI and ARAO issues that are specific to your organization or sector of activity. And it includes key challenges and opportunities, and makes it possible, again, to identify opportunities to take concrete actions tailored to the specific needs of your organization. And once this information has been gathered, you can develop a clear EDI ARAO policy statement that reflects your commitment to these principles. So this should be a clear, concise statement about how your organization is committed to the principles and practices of EDI or ARAO or GBA Plus more generally. And this statement in turn will inform the actions that you take as an organization to meet these commitments. And in order to foster internal buy-in and awareness, it's highly recommended that staff is part of this in a collaborative way, so that their input is taken into account and brought into the policy that's developed, a policy statement that's developed. And also gathering input across staff can ensure a stronger policy, because as I discussed earlier, in terms of intersectionality and GBA Plus, everyone has their own unique experiences of privilege and marginalization, and they may be able to highlight gaps that need to be addressed in the policy as it's drafted. So again, so what is the EDI policy? What does it serve to do? It outlines the work that your organization will undertake to ensure that these commitments are fulfilled. And one approach would be to establish your priorities related to EDI and ARAO issues that have been identified. And for each priority, you can set objectives and a list of activities that will help to achieve them. And again, this builds in a certain amount of accountability for organizations. And it's good to have a clear statement or a clear understanding of who holds responsibility for that policy within your organization and what procedures are or will be put in place to address issues that arise related to the policy. Some other areas that can be addressed within the policy are the communication strategy that you'll employ to ensure that the policy is communicated across the organization effectively. And you can also include timelines and indicators for the work you are committing to undertake. Again, kind of building in another layer of accountability. And another point that or suggestion I would highly recommend is to build in a commitment to regularly review your policy to ensure it reflects sector-based practices and adheres to applicable human rights legislation. So again, for those in those that are attending today that may already have an EDI ARAO policy in place, kind of thinking about when the last time that you reviewed that policy was. Is it maybe time to go back and look at it again with fresh eyes and see if there's anything that can be included that would enhance or expand the capacity of that policy to make a difference within your organization? And also to ensure that the policy is effective, organizations should consider gathering feedback from staff on an ongoing basis. Yes, Simone.
Hi, Stephanie. Sorry to interrupt. There is a message in the chat just saying that it's difficult to follow without the slides being up. And just a request if you could return for a moment to the slide where you mentioned the relationship between GBA Plus and EDI, and maybe just clarify that again. So maybe some people might be feeling a little lost having not seen that slide earlier.
Okay, yeah, sure. So I'll just hop back to that. Just a sec. Okay, so again, the kind of simple way or a really useful way that I found this explained came from our national project manager, in that, you know, EDI or equity, diversity, and inclusion kind of describes the why of doing GBA Plus, and GBA Plus offers the how to actually go about addressing systemic oppression. And so gender-based analysis plus involves analyzing the context within which we live, including our structural and systemic conditions that can create barriers for some as well as opportunities for others. And so keeping that front and center in terms of looking at policies, programs, and services that are being developed or proposed. And then EDI or equity, diversity, and inclusion. Here you'll see kind of each of those a short definition or a short bit about what's covered by each of those terms, and kind of looking at these two side by side to see how they fit together. So when we look at the importance of equity, diversity, and inclusion, we're able to take those whys, why we need to have this lens, and use the GBA Plus lens to address these the structural and systemic conditions. I hope that helped. Let me know if there's still any questions around that, and I'm happy to come back. I'll just, before I move on, were there any other questions with this that anyone had? Okay, so I'll just move back to where we had ended. Okay. Oh, so the last point here on this slide is a really important one. And again, this can be both applicable to those who have a policy in place or those that are thinking to develop one, really making sure that there is some sort of feedback mechanism that's built into this policy and how it's applied within your organization to ensure that you're consistently getting feedback from staff so that you can gauge how well or maybe how well the policy is fitting within the organization and in terms of achieving the ends that are set out with your policy statement, and maybe some ways that it could be improved. So for those that have an EDI policy already in place or an ARAO policy, again, thinking to, when was the last time that staff were surveyed for their feedback on that policy, and getting that feedback will allow the policy to be able to be improved and enhanced as needed. So I have another set of questions following from the discussion of EDI and ARAO policies. And so the kind of overarching question is, do you currently have an EDI policy and or an ARAO policy in place at your organization? You may have both. You may have one or the other, or you may not have any of those policies in place. So the following questions kind of hit on each of those scenarios. So if you don't have one, are there plans to develop and implement one in the near future? If there aren't, what are some of the EDI, ARAO related programs and practices that are currently in place at your organization that could actually serve as the foundation for a formal EDI policy? And if you do have a policy in place, is the policy being regularly reviewed to ensure that it's aligned with the sector-wide best practices and legislation? And again, if you do have a policy, are there ways that that could be expanded or enhanced? With that, we'll break out into the same groups that we were in before, and I'll have about about 7 minutes for discussion, and then we'll come back and share some of the highlights and insights that were gained through the discussion. Share any of the points that were discussed in the last breakout room around EDI and ARAO policies. Oh, and before we jump into discussion, I also wanted to mention, and it was a good point, actually a great point that came up in the breakout room that I was in. So for the purposes of this presentation, I kind of simplified things by referring just to EDI, but of course there are a number of variations on EDI that are broader and more focused than others. So you have EDI-A, which is equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility. And you also have EDI-AB, which is accessibility and belonging. And there's also, GEDI, which is justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. So there's various iterations and versions of this, which again, may have a broader focus than just EDI itself. So when you see EDI in the slides, kind of be considering that full range of forms of EDI policies that are out there, and not just EDI itself. I really appreciated that was flagged in the breakout room. But with that said, I'll open it up for any of you that would like to share some of the highlights or points that you took away from the discussion in your last breakout room. Yeah, Juliana.
Hi, everyone. So I think two important points that we discussed in our group was about the importance of settlement organizations when we do the assessment, not only look at the external work that we do, how we can best serve our clients, but the importance of looking inward and looking at our internal practices, how it is the communication among staff and between different teams. So how important is to walk the talk that we do. So that's really important. And then the second interesting point, so we had Simone from Arisa with us, and she mentioned something that, so I asked her, because my understanding is that you guys already have done like this, the diagnosis and have started to write the policy. And then I was asking her, how do you write a policy, but also providing clear guidelines about action items? So what can we do in a practice, and not only in theory about what we can do to increase EDI? And she mentioned something really interesting that I think you guys were thinking about creating 2 documents. The first one, the why, that it's about like the policies, the why, the guiding principles, but also a second document that's more similar to a procedures guide, that then are you guys going to talk about the how? So that was really, really nice to hear.
Yeah, I think looking at it in that way is really helpful. Thank you, Juliana, for mentioning that, and Simone for highlighting that in the group chat. For sure, I think in order for the policy to really be effective and have an impact in the organization, it can't just be, a nice shiny statement about being committed to equality, diversity, inclusion, and anti-racism, anti-oppression. Like, it has to have real, as you said, action items or action-based items that are going to work to achieve those, or to fulfill that commitment, I should say, to those principles. And so I think whether you split the policy in two parts and have them separate, or have one just, overarching policy, there does need to be those two parts. Like, it can't be just a statement. It really does need to be the action side as well. Yeah, that's really great. Thank you, Juliana. Does anybody else have any points they'd like to share from their discussion? Okay. Okay, so with that, I'll move ahead. So I wanted to open it up before I do to broader discussion and questions around a GBA plus, but I wanted to mention here there's a series of additional resources that I think are really helpful for gaining a more in-depth understanding of GBA plus than is kind of covered in this broad overview. So I think if I'm correct, Simone mentioned this in the chat earlier, but there's the Women and Gender Equality or Wage Canada gender-based analysis plus course. Sorry, it's a short course. Their estimated time for completion is 2 hours, but it in general will probably take a less than that. And you can kind of go at it at your own pace. It's free for everyone and it's easy to access. So I've put the link in the slides, which you'll receive after. Also, the Canada School of Public Service, which is primarily focused on providing training and guidance for public servants within the federal public service. They have GBA plus guidance and guidance and training focused on public servants, because of course GBA plus came out of the federal government and it originated as a strictly as a tool for policy analysis and evaluation. So they have some guidance that's specific and exclusive to public servants, but they also have some really great courses that are micro learning videos, that are accessible to everyone. So I've linked that page as well. So you'll find some really great resources there, I think, for getting a better handle on GBA plus. And also, as I mentioned, the video, the TED Talk actually of Kimberly Crenshaw's TED Talk is linked in an earlier slide. It's about 20 minutes and it's really a worthwhile watch. It's really powerful. But you can also find out more about Crenshaw's work in intersectionality in general through the African American Policy Forum, which I've also linked here on the additional resources page. And so she co-founded this organization, and they do a lot of really great activist work around they started the Say Her Name campaign. So there's really lots you can kind of mine and learn from that organization as well. But just to wrap up, I wanted to open it up to more broadly to questions, comments, anything that after what we've covered already, you may still be wondering about or had questions about. And I'll just skip ahead here, just quickly, just to remind any of you who maybe remind you or maybe inform you if you weren't already aware, but there's a second part to this webinar series that's going to be held on December 12th. And that one, I'll go over GBA plus again a bit as well, but it's really going to be more focused specifically on incorporating GBA plus into your funding proposals. Oh, comment in the chat. Oh, perfect. Yes. Feel free to add your questions to the chat as well. Oh, yeah, Juliana.
So I I think I'm still confused a little bit, Stephanie, because as we all mentioned, the term GBA Plus is still so new, even if we are kind of doing that already. And but I'm still, so I love when you make the distinction and you explain the relation between EDI and GBA Plus about the why and the how. But for some reason, and I'm not sure if I'm the only one who cannot understand that, but I cannot see yet how GBA Plus is the how, because it's still in my head, kind of in a similar place as the EDI concept and kind of the why. So I don't know, can you just explain a little bit more about how GBA Plus can be considered the how? Does it make sense?
Yeah, sure. Yes, and you know, hopefully I'll be able to clarify that a bit more. So GBA Plus offers you know, a version of intersectionality that enables us to look at programs, policies, and services. We can look at those same programs, policies, and services with an eye to looking at equity, diversity, and inclusion. But GBA Plus allows us to look at things, again, from that intersectional perspective. And so, you know, there isn't a huge distinction really between what GBA Plus is and what intersectionality is. It really comes down to kind of the origins of the two. So intersectionality, as I mentioned earlier, and this comes out of Kimberly Crenshaw's work, came out of critical legal studies, and it was really critical race theory. So it's a much more broadly applicable concept of looking at everything in society, not just policies, programs, and services. But with GBA Plus, the Canadian government, you know, took that kind of guiding framework and made it specifically tailored to looking at policy. And so EDI shares, you know, similar concerns of wanting to make things equitable, diverse, and inclusive, and accessible, and create belonging, and all the other kind of iterations of EDI. But it doesn't necessarily provide a formal or foundational analytical lens per se. But if you're doing EDI work in your organization, or you're reviewing things for how they fit and meet EDI commitments, you know, you're already doing part of this work. GBA Plus just gives you a kind of more formal lens for doing that work, and looking at how identities are intersecting to create unique experiences. So, you know, EDI gets at that a bit, but I think GBA Plus goes a little bit further in doing that, if that helps.
Thank you, Stephanie. I think it does. And I'm also looking forward to access more resources. Maybe when I learn more about the what's behind GBA Plus, it will be more clear in my mind as well. Thanks.
Yeah, and just kind of looking at, because I mentioned the origins of GBA Plus, intersectionality, but like looking at the origins of EDI, it really came out of the civil rights movement in the well, not just the US, but a lot of the work started to come out of the US, and looking at how employers could meet legislation that was arising around employment. So EDI started as a very employment-focused approach. And as I said, GBA Plus very policy-focused, more generally in terms of programs and services. But they've all kind of like expanded beyond their original purpose and their original origin, so that you have GBA Plus now, as we can see, as what's like with this national project kind of coming into the settlement sector and being useful and applicable here as well, outside of strictly being, you know, federal policy focused. And the same with EDI, it's expanded beyond just, you know, the original focus on workplaces and workplace legislation, so that you have it, you know, applies to university classrooms, you know, school classrooms. It applies, as many of you know, within the settlement sector and how you do your work. So, you know, a lot of these things are proliferated over time, and kind of there's been crossover because of that, but they all started out with like different purposes and different focuses. And now you kind of see them all coming together, if that helps. Are there any other questions or comments before we wrap up? And forgive me if I don't see your hand if you have it up. I unfortunately can only see a small number of people at a time with this. And also, as Simone said, feel free to put, if you have a question, put it in the chat. Yes, Jennifer.
sorry, just trying to coordinate myself here. So just to go back to the GBA Plus course, and I may have missed it, was that there is one offered by the Canadian government, but you also referred to a course offered by Wage. They are two separate ones, is that right?
No, I mean, it was designed and is hosted by Women and Gender Equality Canada, originally with Status of Women Canada, but it is it's all the same, it's one. So they developed that for guidance within the federal public service.
Okay.
But again, it's expanded beyond that now.
Okay, so yeah, because I think we just heard that it would be very beneficial to have people take, it was referred to the government, and I'm right on the site right now in the CFP, and it's taking me to this one, which doesn't have Wage anywhere on it that I can see at the beginning. So I just wanted to know if there was, and maybe I haven't gone into it, but so I'm just trying to make sure, are there two or they're the same one? So that's my question. But you're saying if we go to the CFP page, click all the way through to says take the course, it's called GBA Plus Introduction. That's the one. There's not a separate one for Wage. Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think they would have, because it's a fairly comprehensive introduction that Status of Women Canada, again, Change to Wage Now, developed. So I don't think they would have duplicated efforts in that way. You may find, like, once you go through it, that there is an identification within it, like for Status of Women of Canada. I noticed, because I started reviewing it again, I took it in 2018 originally, so I was like also due for a refresher. And so ahead of this, I started going through it again, and I noticed it refers back to Status of Women Canada. So it hasn't, like, some of the graphics and some of the material in it, I think you'll find do identify it as material from Status of Women Canada. But again, that's, they've transitioned into being Wage. But yeah, as far as I am aware, it is one course, and I can check into that. But again, 99.9% sure it's just one.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
No, you're welcome. Thank you. Are there any other questions before we say goodbye? Just looking at the chat. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. We're ending just a little bit early, but I know everybody's always happy to get a few minutes back in their schedule. So just a reminder that if you haven't registered already and you are interested, there is the second part of the webinar series on December 12th. And the link to register, the same with this, was distributed in our weekly newsletter. And so you can refer back to that. Oh, we have one more question in the chat. Sorry. Oh, perfect. Melanie, thank you. Yes, Melanie put the link as well back in the chat. So again, if you are interested in taking that second part and didn't originally register for both at the same time, please feel free to do that. And I'll cover a bit of GBA Plus from a broad perspective as well with that, and then move into more of a focused discussion on GBA Plus and funding proposals. Okay. So if there's nothing else, I'm going to say goodbye and thank you, everybody, for showing up and participating. I know everybody's really busy. It's a very busy time of year. And so this is really fantastic and very much appreciate it. So I hope to see you on the 12th. Oh, thank you. Okay. Bye, everybody.